Okay, welcome everyone to this final session of the day. If I could subsidize your energy right now, I would, but I'll try my best to make it as interesting and engaging as possible. So this is a session on repurposing agriculture subsidies, particularly of all kinds, with a view to supporting healthy diets. Now, subsidies, this is not a new topic. It's not a new issue for research. I know IFPRI's been doing research on subsidies since the 70s. A lot of the early work, and even today, a lot of the work has been around the economic efficiency, the targeting issues, the unintended consequences, are there potential benefits, and how long do they last? And of course, the political economy, right? So, but I'm now going to, there we go. Today, there's a broader debate about subsidies of all kinds, not just agriculture, but energy, fossil fuels. And many of them are in the space, not of saying subsidies are good or bad, black or white, this or that, but that there's a huge resource available in many countries from many donors that could potentially be better used. Right, repurposed. That's where the word comes from. The one on the left, the World Bank Detox Development just came out. That talks about all kinds, including agricultural subsidies globally. Lots of new analyses, but it also goes beyond agriculture. I think that's basically a couple of weeks old. The multi-billion-dollar, the third one. Report from FAO and others, UNEP, which is really about agriculture and the potential for repurposing ag subsidies. There's a lot out there, right? Now, what I'm going to talk about is this report from the global panel. So my name is Patrick Webb. This is like one of those shows where you get an intro and then the person says, my name is Patrick Webb. I'm a faculty member at Tufts University in Boston, but also have pretty much since the inception, working with Jeff Wagi here, have been an advisor to the global panel, which is a group of independent, they're in their personal capacity, high-level people like the DG of FAO, the former DG of IFPRI, the president of the African Development Bank. It used to be co-chaired by John Kufuor, the former president of Ghana. So it's a group of people who are dedicated champions to the idea that we can do better, that we have to do better in transforming our food systems for a lot of reasons. And the focus here, what I'm going to be talking about, is a study that was commissioned by the global panel to explore a little bit about this idea of repurposing ag sector subsidies with a view to improving the quality and healthiness of diets and ultimately nutrition, right? So very briefly, I'm going to give just this brief presentation. I'm not going to go into the methods. This isn't a research seminar. I'm just going to highlight some of the key findings with a view to prompting discussion and questions. And then we have some amazing panelists who are going to come up and share their thoughts, and we can hopefully have some dialogue. But the OECD, this is from last year, have now documented, we're talking about globally, almost $820 billion of subsidies that go to agriculture sector activities writ large, and I'll explain what that means. And has been growing, right? A lot of people use the 700 billion. Well, no, it's even bigger than that, right? So this is a big resource, right? We're not talking about starting from scratch, removing all of this, killing programs. It's about how can we use this resource to better effect for agriculture, for climate, for human health through diets and so on. Now, OECD suggests that about half of that right now distorts markets, is not used in ways that can help farmers understand what prices to expect, and therefore also not help consumers afford healthy diets. And that the share in what they call ag support services has been declining. It's actually small, but it's been declining down now to about 13%. And a lot of that actually is considered to be quite helpful in promoting, for example, understanding of agroecology or alternative approaches to fertilizer use, let's say, right? So that's the situation. Put in a different way, this is from FAO, most of the 820 billion goes to price incentives for the farmer, right? So it's producer incentives, the bulk of it. On the left is price disincentives, so essentially taxing farmers, offering them less than market price, so it's a disincentive. And then there are all kinds of other fiscal subsidies, input subsidies, subsidies decoupled from production. You know, there are subsidies in the European Union supporting leaving land fallow or planting it with trees, right? Those kinds of subsidies also in the ag sector. And then the subsidies to the consumer on the right-hand side, quite small, price subsidies to make certain foods more affordable, more accessible, and the general support, right? So it's a range of types of subsidies to the ag sector writ large that we're talking about in this particular analysis. So when I say healthy diets, what that actually means is, what do we think that people should be eating more of, right? Less monotonous diets, less calorie dense, but more nutrient-rich foods. And this is based on analysis also from the global panel, looking at national food-based dietary guidelines. So from African countries themselves, what African governments say its citizens should be eating. And this is the percent of what Africans should be eating more of to meet those dietary guidelines, right? So to reach healthy diets, a lot more legumes need to be consumed across Africa, a lot more grains, nuts and seeds, fruits and vegetables, eggs, and so on, right? That and a significant 50 to 200% increase. So if there's this disconnect between what a healthy African diet should be, what Africans should be eating to be healthy, and what is available to them, begs questions of both domestic production and trade, as well as food loss and waste, and many other dimensions we've been talking about. So it's quite important to keep this in mind. What this analysis is thinking about is, could we tweak some of those resources or repurpose some of these resources to promote the production and consumption of these kinds of foods? And in fact, in this case, we're focusing primarily on fruits and vegetables, which need to increase quite significantly. So in a lot of the global discussion on subsidies, actually sub-Saharan Africa doesn't get mentioned a lot. Partly because there are some significant data gaps. I have to put this right up front. I mean, there's a lot we don't know in sub-Saharan Africa. We do know that agriculture is a major income and livelihood for many, many people, and that populations are growing. So there's growing demand for food, obviously, and there's diminishing farm sizes in many cases. There are two important declarations, the Maputo and Malabo declarations, which both reinforced a commitment across Africa for governments, national governments, to spend at least 10% of their budget on agriculture in all forms, supporting agriculture. Most African countries are not even close to that, even though these are quite old commitments. And as a result, current subsidies to the farm sector in Africa, I should keep saying that, are quite low at about $700 million at this point across Africa. That's actually significantly less than just Switzerland spends on supporting its ag sector. Just to put that in perspective, the whole of Africa versus Switzerland, right? So Africa and subsidies are relatively low, and that's partly why they don't get factored into a lot of analyses. But I'm going to jump very quickly over this. So this work was undertaken by Marco Springmann, Florian Freund last year, based on a agriculture, trade, economy model, the magnet model, looking at country and crop specific outcomes and environmental outcomes, but with healthy diets at the core. I'm not going to go any more. I'm going to give you the reference at the end. This was published in Nature at the end of last year. It, therefore, peer reviewed, but I'm not going to go into the details, just quickly some of the findings. So there were 4 scenarios that they looked at, again, for Africa. Remove all subsidies, just get rid of those 700 million, just cut them and use it for something else. Right, that's the old way of thinking. Let's eradicate subsidies. Second scenario is keep Africa's 700 million, but remove everyone else's subsidies. Well, what might that do from the US, European Union, Australia, and so on? The third one is, well, what if all African countries actually met the Malabo Declaration and increased their own domestic spending on agriculture by to 10% on an annual basis of national spending? And the fourth one, the most interesting, is they increased their spending on agriculture, but direct that 700 million in subsidies towards fruits and veg. And it could be supporting production, it could be supporting processing, it could be consumer support, doesn't really matter. But those are the 4 scenarios just to see what could happen, right, through this model. And a lot of things actually do happen, and they don't only affect fruits and veg. There's knock-on effects that would have to be considered with other crops and other activities. So the remove all African subsidies, the 700 million, actually results in a decline in total production, right? So that's probably not a good idea, right? We don't want to have Africa's production declining overall just by removing those subsidies, but that is what the model suggests. In the main one actually would be horticulture, right? Even though today most subsidies are not directed towards fruits and veg, there would be a massive decline in fruits and veg production. Production, not consumption. We're assuming the knock-on effect to consumption here. Removing outside Africa doesn't do a whole lot. The Malabo Declaration, get every country to meet 10% of their budget spending on agriculture, results in a big increase in production, which you'd expect, right? The government's investing a lot more in ag. You'd expect a lot more production. Well, one of the biggest beneficiaries is fruits and veg, because there's a lot of demand, pent-up demand for fruits and veg. But if you both reach 10% of budget on agriculture and focused the existing subsidies or increased your subsidies towards fruits and veg, you would have a huge increase in fruit and vegetable production, a massive increase in Africa of fruits and veg production, right? So that's really the story here. If you invest more in agriculture, you'll get more of certain crops, possibly less of some, but not really. But if you increase increase spending and focus on fruits and veg, what you do get is a massive increase in fruits and veg, but you do then get a decline in sugar, oilseed, certain other crops. And most of that seems to be because of competition for land, water, and other resources and labor, right? So if you increase and expand horticulture production, you're going to actually have trade-offs with other crops. And you may think that's a good thing or a bad thing. But there are declines in other kinds of production. The economic effects, just very quickly, remove all subsidies in Africa, you see a decline. Remember, production fell, so you see a decline both in returns to agriculture and exports. Remove subsidies outside Africa, you actually do see an increase in ag sector returns and exports, because of removal of subsidies that block African exports, essentially. Malabo Declaration, 10% increase, well, not 10% increase, reaching 10% of national budget in agriculture, big increase in ag sector productivity, supply, and returns on investment, and a small increase in exports, and then focus on fruits and veg, as I said, even more increase in terms of economic returns, because these are high value crops, and exports increase just a little bit. But just a little bit also means, remember, competition with other crops, and exports actually don't go up any higher than that, because what you do see in this scenario is a decline in coffee and cocoa exports, right? So the actual total value of exports decline. Most of it is shifting to horticulture. Oh, that's an interesting slide. The environmental impacts. And I said that there are likely to be trade-offs. There are always trade-offs. And one of the trade-offs, so if production declined overall, the first scenario, big decline in production and productivity, actually you see less use of water and land, and basically net in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But the focus on fruits and veg with the high investment scenario in Africa sees a huge increase in water and land use. So that's not an insignificant issue as we move toward in climate change impacts and try and understand the competition, not just the economic competition, but the agronomic competition across these various crops. So when we're trying to model the effects of improving people's diets, that comes at a cost, right? And there's potentially a cost to the environment, there's potentially a cost to exports in other crops. And we have to bear that in mind. So findings in Africa, subsidies are low. Right now, removal would reduce income and productivity. Why would you do that? That's not an issue. We don't want to do that. Outside of Africa, reducing subsidies can remove some of the distortions that would improve the ability for Africa to export, if that's what they want to do. Increasing subsidies in Africa for certain crops over others would increase production, would have negative environmental impacts, but in fact, modeling through to health outcomes of the changed consumption, if you only increase fruits and veg, that's not enough. You have to increase fish consumption, dairy, eggs, whole grains, right? So just subsidizing one crop, even if it's a nice crop, isn't going to have the health impacts that you would like. Right? Coupling the subsidies in Africa, the final scenario, to healthy, sustainable foods does increase production. It reduces the dietary risks, the risk factors relating to fruits and veg, inevitably, that's what you'd expect. Technological improvements or something would be needed to bring in productivity gains to protect land and water. And we'd have to also think about the use and abuse of pesticide and herbicide, which in most other parts of the world go alongside horticulture. And we'd have to think about what those impacts, negative impacts, could be. I'm going to switch to the final slide. So the bottom line here is it's not black and white, as I said. This is of quite a nuanced type of story, and we have to do more of this kind of nuanced analysis to look at trade-offs across, not just with or without, but across crops, across technologies, maybe, across countries. These are huge resources. $800 billion is a lot of money that could be used to better effect. But so the net potential for human and planetary health is really quite positive, it's right, strong, but you've got to get it right. Traditionally, subsidies have been a fairly blunt instrument. It's very hard to administer good targeting, effective targeting, to be cost effective, to ensure the outcomes that you want. Doesn't mean it can't be done, but you have to ensure you're not doing harm at the same time. And you have to know that there's no erosion of food security, particularly for the poorest, the vulnerable, as you go about policy changes of this kind or adjusting and repurposing this kind of resource. There's always going to be trade-offs, always. That's a given. But this kind of a modeling can help enhance the discussion. And that's essentially what we're trying to do here. And I'll stop there and hand over to our moderator. Thank you. That's where the brief is.
Thank you very much. Another round of applause for the professor. I would like to call to the stage our panelists. We have online Philippe Dizion. If you're online, we welcome you. Philippe is an economist at the World Bank, focusing on food global practice and His research work has focused on assessing the opportunities for making diets more healthier and sustainable. So welcome, Philippe, online. Besides that, we also have Helen Wars. Helen is an associate professor at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Welcome. She has researched on drivers of food choices, as well as political economy of public health. She'll be sharing with us her insights on how repurposing agricultural input subsidies would be of benefit to reform food systems. We also have a government counterpart from the Malawi Ministry of Agriculture, Justin Kagona. Please join us on stage. Justin is the current coordinator of the Agricultural Input Subsidy Program in Malawi. And all these experts will be sharing their reflections on what Professor has shared with us. We go to Helen. Can you please share your reflections?
So yeah, thanks very much, Miriam, and thank you very much to the global panel as well for the opportunity to contribute to the discussion today. I think that the results from the global panel that were presented, these like modelling studies, I think the results, they really highlight the importance of this kind of work for the kind of comparisons that we saw earlier. And indeed, I mean, it's sparking the conversation that we're having today as well. But at the same time, this kind of work is done at like quite an aggregate level and contains a lot of assumptions. So it's really important to make sure that this kind of modelling work is combined with work and experience, perspectives, I guess, from closer to the ground as well. And that was something that Patrick was also picking up on in some of his later slides. So this, I think, gives me the opportunity to draw on some insights from some research that Miriam and I and several others have been involved with, where we've been exploring Malawi's farm input subsidy program and its impact on food choices and dietary diversity. And we've also looked at the context for that impact as well. So I'll share two insights. Miriam, I think, may speak to several others as well. So first of all is policy implementation. You can have a really, really nicely designed policy, but how it actually plays out in practice is really important in terms of the kinds of outcomes that are achieved. There are people, I guess, officials, policymakers at different levels that are tasked with implementing the policy, and their job is to interpret the policy and to navigate obstacles that might come up. Sometimes they're successful with doing that, and other times not so much. So policies change in the way that they're implemented, sort of by officials perhaps lower down in the food chain. And then there's also the interaction with the people who are targeted by the policy as well. So the beneficiaries of the policy, they interact with the policy. They also influence the way that, I guess, the outcomes of the policy. So we and others as well have documented in Malawi how people will often in communities, recipients of the subsidy program, they may share coupons in the community or sell on the coupons because they've got this need to satisfy immediate sort of financial concerns. And these sorts of activities, they shape the policy. So you can have a nicely designed policy or a nicely designed, repurposed subsidy program, but you also need to think very carefully about the policy implementation aspects as well, and often those are quite contextual. And sort of related to that, but also a slightly different point is around the trade-offs and synergies. Oh, okay. Is that better? Sorry. Okay. So a different but also related point is around the trade-offs and synergies. And I mean, Patrick was talking about them in terms of different sectors, health and the environment, for example. But there are also some of these trade-off and synergies within health and nutrition. And we've looked at them in terms of different food and nutrition objectives. So in Malawi, of course, there's this predominance of maize in diets, and people in the public health community have found it very difficult to find ways to help to shift people's diets to something that's more diverse. And so we've drawn on several data sources and analyses to sort of explore some of this. One of them was where we're using an experimental design, where we lowered the price of maize, kind of in an experimental hypothetical sense, and then explored what people's food choices would be. So if the price of maize lowers significantly, will people then feel like they're able to choose, will they have a preference for a greater diversity of products? And we found that they actually didn't. So even when the price of maize lowers quite significantly, people's preference is still for greater quantities of maize rather than more diverse products. And then when we look at who in households is redeeming the legume coupons that were part of the farm input subsidy program, it's the food secure households that are redeeming the coupon, not the legume coupons, not the food insecure households, which kind of suggests, again, it goes back to this issue of poverty and food insecurity, and that it's those that are able to satisfy security requirements that are able to use the legume coupons that are incentivized by the program and perhaps diversify the production and perhaps consumption as well. This is all about context and in Malawi, people are often very insecure, very food insecure, high levels of poverty, and are unlikely to, from our findings, diversify their diets, even when incentivized by perhaps repurposed subsidy programs, unlikely to diversify their diets until food security needs are met. Of course, in Malawi, there's also the single rainy season, and horticultural crops require more water and sort of periods of greater access to water. So that would also sort of complicate the issue when looking at a more sort of local level. And I know Miriam's the chair, but I think you've got several additional insights to share as well.
Just one addition is that I think some of the findings that we had focusing on the preference of farmers, that they would still want to have additional maize, even if they could possibly afford other commodities with a reduction in price of maize. That speaks to the nutrition education that we provide to the communities around. So there is need to invest a lot in nutrition education to ensure that people can change their preferences for some types of food. I think in the previous session, we also had something around that. And with the regard to issues of climate and resilience, Professor touched a little on that. There's need to ensure that communities, we build their resilience. We can think of the recent cyclone Fred and how it has devastated livelihoods in the southern part of Malawi. And for those communities, I think input subsidies would be key to ensure that they rebuild their lives, they recover. So I think the role of subsidies might also depend on the context and the way you are and the conditions that are available. Thank you very much. I'll switch as the moderator now. Can we hear from Philip? What are your reflections?
Okay, perfect. Thanks. And thanks, Patrick, and really good to hear from Helen and Miriam as well. Very happy to be here. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but really happy to be in this panel. So maybe just quickly some 3 reflections on my side from the presentation and the topic of repurposing for healthy diets. First, around the nuances on the repurposing agenda and what it means for Africa. Second, on broadening our view of agri-food subsidies and broadening our view of what diets and nutrition mean. And third is where do we go from here, right? What are our options for better programming and better investments in the sector? So in the first point, in what the repurposing agenda means for Africa, we often hear the $700, $800 billion a year number thrown around in public support for programs and policies in the agri-food sector. And we know that a large chunk of this is from middle-income countries and high-income countries, as Patrick already mentioned. And so when I first encountered Marco Springman and Florian Voigt's work about a year ago, I was excited about the emphasis on healthy diets, but more importantly about the emphasis in Africa, which was an emphasis, a focus that was particularly missing for various reasons. And what we know now is that the nuance in the region is that it is less about repurposing existing spending per se, but more about scaling and scaling right. And so one is how to scale finance in the agri-food sector, finance that is direly needed, but two, how to do so in a way that it supports the right investments. That said, I want to reflect a bit on a new report that Patrick mentioned called Detox Development, Repurposing Harmful Environmental Subsidies. The parallel to the need for scaling and scaling right is that currently the region is also, well, doing too little and likely a less effective way. So a few insights on agricultural subsidies from this Detox Development report that just came out about 2 weeks ago is that true, while most of the global support for the agri-food sector is coming from middle income and high income countries, lower income countries are spending the little that they do mostly in coupled subsidies and less so on infrastructure and less so on research and development. And so in general, current subsidies are also found to reduce on-farm efficiency and are also found to not necessarily be pro-poor. For example, in Malawi, as part of this report, new evidence shows that a reduction in the fertilizer subsidy was found to increase technical efficiency. And second, that for every dollar spent in subsidies for the bottom 20%, there's about $5 spent on the top 20% of the income distribution. And so, the general point here, and we're all on board, is that there's certainly room to together rethink subsidies in Africa. The second reflection is to, again, going back to this report on detox development, is thinking about broadening our view on what agri-food subsidies mean and thinking of it as part of a bigger whole. And also to think about diets and nutrition as part of a bigger whole in terms of human health. So agri-food subsidies are part of a whole. Explicit subsidies to the energy sector, in particular fossil fuels, agri-food sector, and fishery sector are estimated at $1.25 trillion per year globally. And so this fuller set of subsidies has important externalities or spillover effects, if you will, on the environment and on human health. And thinking about these pieces together allows for a fuller view of the issues at hand and a fuller view of what the options are for repurposing, if we think of subsidies in a broader sense. Also, we could think of nutrition as part of a whole, and part of a whole for better human health. And so 2 examples from this Detox Development report on the links between repurposing subsidies and human health that we can think about. So one on fertilizers, right? So agricultural subsidies, which increase fertilizer use, can lead to over-application and can increase nitrogen pollution in waterways, which have implications for human health. The report notes that inefficient use of input subsidies account for up to 1/5 of global nitrogen pollution in the water over the past 30 years. And so it's not a minute issue. Second point is on forests. Agricultural subsidies are responsible for about 2.2 million hectares of deforestation each year. And that's about 14% of deforestation every year. And deforestation increases the spread of vector-transmitted diseases like malaria. And so there's this link between agricultural subsidies, deforestation, and malaria prevalence. It's estimated that deforestation leads to about 1.3 to 3.8 million cases per year of malaria, with economic impacts on the other end. And so the point being is that it would be useful to think about repurposing for health a little bit more generally, and to think about this across sectors, and to think about the different pathways that repurposing would have to better achieve human health. And so third and final point is where do we go from here? And what are possible options for better programming and supporting better investments? And I'd like to take this opportunity to highlight a few things that the World Bank is supporting, in particular in Malawi, that might shed light into where do we go from here kind of question. So one recommendation from the Detox Development report is that social protection and compensation are an imperative, especially when subsidies are removed and especially to support the vulnerable. The bank, alongside other development partners, supports the Social Support for Resilient Livelihoods project with a goal of improving resilience among the poor and vulnerable population and strengthening national platform for safety nets. And so this includes supporting the Social Cash Transfers Program, the Climate Smart Enhanced Public Works Program, livelihood support, as well as strengthening harmonized delivery systems of social protection. Another recommendation from the Detox Development report is that sound strategies for reinvesting reform revenues are needed in infrastructure, health, and education. Sorry.
Please wind up. You
Sure.
can-
Give me 10 seconds. And so this last project I'll mention is the Food Systems Resilience Program that invests in ag research and innovation systems, digital ag platforms, land demarcation and registry. And so I'll end here. With this, I guess the point is that I'm really optimistic about the existing ways that are on the ground to do things better. And excited to scale and explore more of these solutions and continue the discussion with everyone here. Thanks, and sorry if I went over time.
Much. Can we hear from Justin Kagona to tell us the real practical aspects on the ground, since Malawi has been implementing the agriculture input subsidy programs for the last 20 or so years?
Thank you very much. Let me also thank the professor for the presentation, repurposing. But I think with the interest of the horticulture and the fruits, I think our interest is the gaining income from the households that are doing cultivation and what have you. But I think the purpose of subsidies in Malawi originated from the areas that we used to have a lot of food deficiencies, food insufficiencies, and we frequently imported food. Unfortunately, in Malawi, food is defined by a lot of carbohydrates, which is maize or corn. So the government used to spend even importing a lot of corn for the purpose of the feeding the population. So it's when now the introduction of subsidies used to come in. It has been in different forms. I think in 80s it has been there, in the 90s it has been there, and in 2005 it was modified to produce the food that they're going to buy through this support, the subsidies that we might do in these other interventions. And again, I wanted to share, I wanted to make this point of the subsidies in Malawi. I normally say that the subsidies in Malawi hinge on 3 sections. I would say pillar or sections, if that to move forward. The first thing is that it has to be technically sound. With the subsidies, for example, on the horticulture and the fruits, we can have technical sounding modeling or program that is going to promote vegetables, that is going to promote whole fruit production. That's okay. And possibly it might also work well with the other pillar in terms of economic component that we might end up, even though the presentation showed less exports in horticultural production, but we may end up also increasing, making economic sense and maybe reducing the expenses of the government. But there's another pillar that's the economic pillar, that is the second one. But there's another third economic pillar in subsidies in Malawi, which is political pillar. They have to be politically sound for them to be promoted, for them to be, to be well implemented. And the subsidies in Malawi, they have not shunned away from these 3 pillars. So if we are introducing horticultural, for example, we are trying to introduce horticulture in production, economically, it could be sound. Technically, it could be sound. But I think the political side is where it's going to have a lot of work to get the support. And again, I think that's the area that we need to focus. When we are looking at repurposing the subsidies or agriculture subsidies, I'm not sure of other countries, but at least in Malawi, we should all focus these pillars that it's best fit in these pillars. Okay, now let me also comment on the horticultural direction that we are trying to discuss. I think let me first of all look at the environmental part. I think the environmental part, Professor, looked at it's promoting the land use and water use when we are using the horticulture. But I think there's another element that horticulture production, especially vegetable production in Malawi, leads to the input needs. And if we promote this, then we have also to consider how to manage chemical utilization. The investment, it needs a lot of investment in the irrigation sector to promote the fruit and the vegetable production. I don't want to talk about the nature of the products, which is in terms of perishability of the products that we're talking about. In the end, we might end up producing more through promoting subsidies, but we are going to have a lot of losses through now loss in value, rotting, and so on, if we are not careful in the marketing part of the vegetables, in the rooting structures that are going to make to increase the shelf life of these vegetables and fruits. I think I would want to stop there. Possibly there could be other issues relating to, but I wanted to indicate that I think the current subsidies that we are implementing, there have been a lot of schools of thoughts that I think she handled part of the subsidies in Malawi that I think issues of beneficiaries, selling, and what have you of the entitlements, which is to do with the targeting model that maybe is something that the government is looking at now through the insights from various stakeholders. I think I can stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justin. We are going to take a round of questions from the audience, both online and here present. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask. But to begin with, there's a Ramia online, who is asking the panelists to speak a little about where the intended subsidies target should be, so that we can see the impact on diets. Should it be small scale or medium scale farmers? And about budgets for nutrition within agriculture. So she wants a little more from the panelists around those issues. If you can respond to that as people are getting ready with their questions. You want to take that one? As we are repurposing the agriculture input subsidy programs, where should we be targeting to ensure that there's impact on diets?
We have to remember that producers, smallholder producers, are also consumers. They're actually net purchasers of food in most countries in Africa. So I think we have to do what we can for smallholder farmers to enhance not just the production of a diversity of crops, but to ensure that they have enough purchasing power to purchase a diversity of foods. Right? Both matter. And there's plenty of accumulating evidence now that supporting smallholders to diversify their production does help both to sell and to consume a diversity of foods. But we may also have to think at larger farmers because there are economies of scale for certain crops. And we basically, to ensure that there's a diversity of nutrient-rich foods across markets across the whole country, basically we have to ensure that there's entry points, small, middle, large, but especially, as Justin was just saying, ensure that there is enough downstream off-farm capacity to prevent food loss and waste. You don't want to just produce more. You want to ensure that those products get to the consumer. So that kind of investment in the value chain in small businesses matters as much as it does on the farm.
Thank you very much. Ramya online also says that these are interesting comments from Rachel and Anna. Nutrition education is necessary but not sufficient. On the other hand, similarly, affordability is necessary but also not sufficient. So having a highly affordable diet alone may not translate into consumption. So she's following the discussion and making her reflections. Helen, we are running out of time, so quickly make your comments succinct and respond to me.
So totally agree, Anna. And yeah, I'll try and answer both at the same time. So one issue, affordability is a major problem globally, not just in Malawi. And a lot of, subsidies, Jeff, absolutely could actually be shifted towards consumer subsidies, right, to stimulate desirability and consumption, for example. But affordability isn't just about making more supply, reducing loss and waste, and bringing relative prices down. It's also about increasing purchasing power. And so the comment about, and Felipe, about thinking beyond just the food sector, but there's subsidies in energy, there's subsidies elsewhere, right? What we need to also be doing is increasing incomes through a variety of mechanisms, targeted transfers, various social protection programs, but also potentially supporting new jobs and income streams off the farm in the food sector, right? Processing, transportation, improved wholesale and retail. And there's a lot of studies that suggest that in the future, more jobs will be there than on the farm. And so increasing purchasing power and then spreading income to be able to enhance affordability, I think, are parts of the solution.
Thank you very much.